Ahoy, I'm Sana, and this video is one that I've been looking forward to filming for quite a while, and it's kind of a follow-up of a video I did with my friend Lex last year, where we talked about our favourite retellings of classics. And with this video I wanted to continue in that realm, but with a different starting point and a slightly different theme. And the kickoff point and inspiration for this is the Deathless Girls. And this video is also sponsored by Hachette for the release of the paperback of the Deathless Girls. It's by Karen Millwood Hargrave. It was one of my favourite books of 2019, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it later. But first of all, I want to kind of explain a bit more about the theme of the books I'm recommending in this video and how I got there. So all of the books in this video have in common is that they're about unheard voices. As you'll probably know, there's the literary canon, the books that are selected to be taught in schools and universities, the stories that have been picked for whatever reason because they have a certain value. And a lot of these stories came from similar authors, similar perspectives, very often male, very often white. And definitely over the last years, I feel like there's been a change in people looking at the curriculum and looking at which books you put on, you know, a list of classics everyone should read. But there's also been a really interesting space where people have gotten the chance to maybe take one of those stories and retell it or rewrite it, or take one of the small characters that they felt didn't get very good representation and then take that and write their own story. So the books I'm covering in this video are mostly either a retelling from one character's perspective, who was maybe a smaller character, or the author has taken a story and put a totally different spin on it. It was actually quite tricky to find some of these, and I included some of your recommendations as well. I'm also definitely really keen to get more recommendations in this realm, so if you have any, please leave a comment below. Okay, so I'm gonna get into the first one, the Deathless Girls, and also talk a little bit more about how that theme works within this book. I've read one of Karen's other books and definitely keen to read more. This is part of a new imprint called Bellatrix, which is again about underrepresented voices. This story is told from the perspective of the brides of Dracula. I have my copy of Dracula here that I dragged around with me for about, I don't know, like over 15 years until I finally read it recently. I have a reading vlog about that if you want to check that out. There's these women in the book that have this very small role, and so Karen took that as a jumping off point and then wrote this story, which is about two sisters. They're twins. They are travelers, which is a group of people that's been persecuted quite a lot throughout history. And apparently it has its origin in northern India, which is where Karen's family's from. The book starts very much outside of the story of Dracula, where these girls get taken captive and have to work in a kitchen. The main character's called Lil, her sister's Kizzy. Her sister gets taken away. There are these, are they called counts? They call it boyars. And it's all about Lil trying to reunite with her sister. I was gonna say slowly the story becomes darker and darker, but it starts off pretty dark to begin with them being captured. I love anything gothic, so this was right up my street, and I also liked them going through the forest gathering food, or trying to escape on horseback, or working in the kitchen, trying to not get noticed but find a way out at the same time. And then of course at some point you realize that vampires are thrown in the mix. And amidst all this darkness and chaos, there's also this warm love story between Lil and a girl she meets in the kitchens called Mira. This is definitely a great one for anyone who loves dark, creepy castles, wandering through forests in the middle of the night. And I think for me, one of my favorite things about the writing was the warmth of the relationships and the bond between these sisters, and there's also a lot of grief involved. And the description of nature and the surroundings just felt so luscious. I mean, you can also see this gorgeous cover. It's actually illustrated on the inside as well. I just love what Karen's done with this, the fact that you can read a few lines about a character in a book and then go and take those characters and create this whole different world and backstory for them. I read this for the first time last year, and I'm pretty sure I'll be rereading it soon. Then something similar but totally different is Once and Future. And this is, and it's one hell of a pitch, a reincarnation of King Arthur in space, in the future. She's called Ari. She lands on old Earth that's pretty much been abandoned, finds a sword, pulls it out of a tree. Merlin is awakened, and he is way younger than he was before, because every incarnation he shows up younger. And it's his job to help Arthur, or in this case Ari, kind of help humankind unite. And he's been doing this over and over and over again, and it's never really worked. Starting with the first King Arthur, and this is kind of a madcap adventure through space. It deals with immigrants and sexuality and gender and so much more. As soon as I started reading this, I realized I didn't know that much about King Arthur, and I went to Wikipedia, did a quick recap. I really enjoyed reading about the popularity of King Arthur stories through time, and didn't realize that Tennyson, one of my favorite poets, apparently had a big part in making it popular again. And there's one book by T.H. White, which was an Arthurian retelling, but kind of like telling the original story, that really inspired the two authors of this book. I'm pretty sure the authors are a couple, Amy Rose Capetta and Corey McCarthy. There must be a bit of inspiration from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in here, even if it's just that this is the 42nd reincarnation of Arthur. And I just found it really nice and freeing that I think these authors just had this idea of what they really wanted to create, and it felt like they had just been given free rein to do so. I think personally for me, it moved a little bit quickly, as in like multiple things would happen on a single page. I think I would have preferred for the pacing to be a little bit slower. If this sounds like your kind of thing, like conversations about history and gender and relationships. Oh, and it also talks about basically the villain is this big corporation. I feel like maybe the cover doesn't represent the book very well, although this is a really, really cool cover. I mentioned this in the previous video, but of course I have to do a shout out to one of the original reimaginings, retellings. It is Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. I have my student edition because I wrote an essay about it. I should actually mention, I wrote my bachelor's thesis about YA reinterpretations of the poem The Lady of Shalott by Tennyson, which is also why this sparked extra interest. This is a reimagining or backstory of Bertha, who is definitely an unheard voice in the story of Jane Eyre. There are some subtle, not so subtle clues that this is what it is, but I also think it's very possible for people to read it, and maybe if they haven't read Jane Eyre, they wouldn't realize this. I'm super, super keen to reread it. It's about her growing up and then meeting Mr. Rochester and the relationship that they have together, and how everything starts falling apart. And again, having a chance to see it from a different point of view, because she doesn't get a chance to tell her story in Jane Eyre. It's set in the Caribbean, and the author was born in Dominica. And I think when you read this, you can definitely see that there was, you know, a moment where the author went, this is something I need to write and that I want people to see. Then I finally read Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. I've been talking about it for years, wanting to read it, and this was the perfect opportunity to do so. The TV show is out now as well, and this falls more in kind of the world of a reimagining, an alternative history. This is set in a world of noughts and crosses. The noughts are white and the crosses are black, and the crosses are kind of the dominant society, the people who have the most opportunities, the most wealth, the most power. It's set in Britain. When you watch a TV show, they have like a very cool map kind of showing, I guess, like colonization of Europe by Africa. It's about a boy called Callum from a Knots family, quite a poor family, and then about Sephi from a Crosses family, very rich family, and about their friendship, which then turns into a relationship, and it's definitely forbidden. It deals with terrorism, it deals with relationships and privilege. It's a hard-hitting, action-packed story. There's a letter by Mallory Blackman in the beginning of this book explaining why she wanted to write this all these years ago, which was, I think maybe around 2001, how important this was for her to get this out there and get her voice heard and write this also so people could see a different perspective and, you know, maybe think a little bit more about their own actions and the way they see things. So yeah, really interesting discussion of race. I know a lot of people have read this maybe when they were a teenager. This has definitely become like a YA classic on its own. Also, Sephi's name. Yeah, so I think Persephone's name and maybe a tiny bit of the plot was inspired by Greek mythology, and then also, you know, there's a bit of a Romeo and Juliet, two different families, two different groups going on. Very quick honorable mention for Circe. I feel like I've talked about this book too much, potentially. This book has definitely seen better times. I think maybe rain was involved in this damage. Retelling by Madeline Miller of the story of the character of Circe, often villainized. And here again, you get to see the character as a full person, and you get to see their motivation, what they go through, and see maybe another side of things. So again, another brilliant way to really bring a character to life. This is also Greek mythology, by the way. And finally, this one that I'm still in the middle of reading, but I'm really enjoying, and this was recommended by one of you because I hadn't heard of it before, really, and I'm surprised I hadn't heard of it before. It is Longbourn by Joe Baker, very shiny library copy, and this is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice through the eyes of the servants in the house, particularly through one servant, but there's a mix of them. It gives you a really stark view of what it was like working in a house like this, and the daily chores and the lack of freedom, and also kind of the frivolity of the lives of the people that they work for, and maybe how inconsiderate they are quite often. Can't really imagine the lives of their maids. And obviously the day-to-day chores, I think some readers, like I was reading some reviews and it's a very dividing book. There's a lot of like 2 or 3 stars and a lot of 5 stars. I think a lot of people saying like, oh, it's really boring because nothing happens and they just do the same thing over and over again. But I really like kind of the reality of that, and interspersed you kind of get to see the story of Pride and Prejudice happen in the background. I have read quite a few books told from kind of like servant's point of view, or like maybe like a poor teenage girl in Victorian times, and that's definitely a perspective that I want to read more from, but this was a really interesting twist on that. Every chapter starts with like a little sentence from Pride and Prejudice, and sometimes it's just something that's like, and the footman walked in, and then that's kind of the kicking off point. I also really want to read The Other Bennet Sister, which is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, or at least part of it, from Mary's point of view, but obviously Longbourn definitely was more around the theme of unheard voices. So if you're keen to read some different perspectives, if you're a big fan of classics and kind of want to see a different twist on it, then hopefully you found some recommendations in this video. Again, I want to say massive thanks for Hachette for working with me on this, on the Deathless Girls. When I get to do a video like this working with a publisher, it means I get to spend more time reading and researching it, and it's been really fun to do so, and also just really excited to work on a book that I loved so much. The paperback of the Deathless Girls is out now, so definitely pick up a copy if you can. Links to everything will be in the description. If you have any other videos you'd like to see on a specific theme of books, let me know in a comment below. I hope you're all doing okay, and I'll see you soon. Doei!